Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint a red-eyed tree frog in acrylics. Now the main aim for me creating this project was to show how to paint and capture really vibrant colours in acrylics. This is something that can be a little trickier to do, especially as some of the brands of acrylic paint are naturally more transparent. Now my brand of preference that I like to use is Liquitex Basics, and lots of the colours that I'm going to be using in this project, such as reds, yellows and oranges, are naturally transparent, especially the oranges and the yellows. Now for this, in order for me to capture the colour saturation and that really vibrant impact of this piece, I have to make sure that I layer correctly. Now the layering process is something that I talk about in all tutorials, but more specifically with this, it's about making sure that I've got my opaque layers in first, letting them dry, and then going over the top with my more transparent and therefore the vibrant colours in this piece. Now if I try to work with my transparent colours, so I naturally mix my orange values and I try to put that over the top of my darker underlayer for my background, it's just not going to show up. So for instance, the greens that I'm painting here, if I haven't painted in an opaque layer first, they're just not going to be visible. So this is one of the times where working with your bright colours with acrylics can become quite stressful, because we're not able to do that as easily as we may think. But it can be easily achieved as long as the layering process is correct. As you can see here, as I continue to build up layers, I'm gradually working up towards that vibrant colour. I can't achieve that just with one or two layers. Now the real-time version of this red-eyed tree frog, which is available on my Patreon, focuses on all of this aspect thoroughly. So I painted this with a voiceover while I'm painting, so every single process is explained in the moment. When I start to work on the details here and building up more of the skin texture, again I'm focusing with my opaque layers and then working with my glazes. Now I use glazes for a couple of different reasons depending on the effect that I'm trying to create, but I do have a video here on YouTube and I'm talking through with various examples of different paintings where and why I'm using glazes, so if that's of interest I'll link that glazing tutorial in the description below. Now I use glazes in every single one of my paintings, there is not one exception there, I've always incorporated it at some point. But this sort of project where we're trying to get this colour and vibrant saturation, the layering and glazing process is so important. Now when you're working with glazes, there's a couple of things that are very important. So you want to be making sure that the layer underneath is completely dry. If that paint is even slightly tacky, that glaze is going to then lift that paint and then you're going to end up with a real cloudy and murky look. You do want to be making sure that painting is completely dry before you start working with your glazes. Now something that I show in all of my YouTube tutorials is how I like to work in small sections. So I will break it up if I need to into 1 or 2 square inches, or in this case here, the tiniest of sections on the arm. This enables me to work through that painting without becoming overwhelmed. Now if you're finding that you're staring more at your reference photo and not actually painting, that's an indication that you're working on too much of a larger area. Scale that down, work on 1 or 2 square inches at a time, just like I am here, and you'll find that you'll work more effectively. Now there is nothing wrong with working with whole individual layers, so you could block the entire frog in, wait for that to dry, do your second layer and so on. But I do find for me personally that I end up skipping through important layers. So it's something that I don't like to do, but if you do want to work like that, then just make sure that each layer is given the right amount of time. Now the other thing, as I'm building up my glazes here to soften out some of those shadows, look at how I'm really focusing as well on soft edges. So I don't want there to be any harsh transitions from light to dark, apart from on where the colours are very different. So here I'm going to be working on the green section of the foot, and then it's going to be for the rest of the toes an orange colour. So on these exceptions where you've got markings that are very different, then yes, you may have a solid edge. But from light to dark shadows, like underneath the chin and the lower part of the chest, that there looks very soft. And that's helping to give that smooth look to the skin to avoid those harsh edges and therefore creating more of a two-dimensional feel. By working with those softening and blending techniques, we're able to capture more of that three-dimensional feel by making it look like the highlights and shadows are curving over that shape of the animal really following the structures under the skin. Now as I continue to layer here, look at how beautiful these colours are. I loved this project. It was such a fun piece to work on because the colour saturation is stunning. I was able to capture those really vibrant oranges all through using that very simple but effective layering process. Purely by working through these really difficult and ugly stages, this does not look good, but you've got to keep on layering until you've got what you want in that finished piece. Really studying that reference photo to notice exactly where those highlights and shadows are is crucial. The highlights and shadows, they're not random. They will follow the underlying bone and muscular structure. So for instance, I'm adding highlights on the top curve on the left-hand side of this leg. That's going to help to make it look like the light source is catching that top section of the arm. Now the other thing that's important with this is because this frog would have that wet skin texture, we want to be making sure that we've captured that in our painting. Now in order to make anything look wet or shiny, this would also be the case for drawing metal, so maybe a horse's bridle or a dog collar. You want to have really high contrast. So you want to be making sure that you've got your darks dark and your highlights bright. Now at the moment, the eyes, the lower part of the throat area looks a little bit muted. I'd say it looks more of like a greyish tint rather than a sharp black. Now what I've done here is worked with many black glazes, but it doesn't look black yet. Now the reason that that's happened is that the paint is actually dried. Now because Liquitex Basics has a matte finish, it dries with a little bit more of a dull appearance. However, as soon as you varnish that, my preference is a gloss varnish, the paint will go back looking how it did when it was wet. So you'll have your really sharp contrast, your nice dark values, your bright highlights, but that colour as well, it's going to really stand out. It will be even more vibrant than it looks at the moment. Now, of course, that does always rely on the fact that the values are good to start with. So you don't want to be varnishing your painting if you feel that you could potentially make things darker and make your highlights brighter. You want to do all of those adjustments before you apply that varnish. Now, as I continue to work on the feet here, look at how I've captured a really nice shine. Now, again, that goes back to your contrast. You want to be making sure that you've got those highlights really bright. And for this last layer, in this situation, I have just used titanium white on its own. It hasn't been thinned with water, and that ensures it's as bright and as white as I could possibly get it. Now, when it came to working on the feet, the one aspect that I did focus on in the real-time version on Patreon is how to break it up into manageable sections so that the end painting, it looks like toes and a foot. Now, it doesn't matter if we're painting a person or any animal's feet, it can be very overwhelming to make the toes and the fingers look realistic. You can sometimes end up with a bit more of like a sausage appearance, and you don't end up therefore replicating that reference photo as closely as we should. Now that's just because our brain is sometimes telling us, I know what a hand looks like, I know what the finger looks like, and we start to move away from that reference photo. So what I like to do here, as you can see, is I'm blocking it into individual toes. I'm not trying to paint the whole foot at the same time. I find therefore if I'm focusing on my lights and my darks for each foot, each toe individually, I'm not able to then progress through it too quickly. I'm not speeding that process up. And that can happen without us even realising it. It's not until we've maybe come halfway through that painting process and we start to think, do you know what, there is something that's not right, but I'm not entirely sure what it is. And it's usually because we've tried working on too much of a larger area, especially when you have got the fingers here. This foot in particular that I'm working on now, where it's gripped onto the very edge of the plant, it takes on a very peculiar shape compared to the other 2 feet. So this is one of those times where I just want to focus on the shapes and my lights and my darks. If I do that, by the time I've got to the end of that section, it will look like that reference photo. Now, in my real-time tutorials on Patreon, I never leave out any mistakes or things that I would maybe do differently in the next painting. Now for this, you can see that I'm having to paint around all the toes, and it was okay in the end, but it definitely took me a little bit longer to make sure that I didn't cover up the parts of the feet that I was obviously happy with and finished. So I did have to take extra care when blocking in the base layers of this plant. If I'd have painted this first and then painted the frog and the feet on top, I could have been a little bit more quicker with that layering process. It wouldn't have been quite so fiddly. Now that being said, I still got to the same end goal. There is no difference here to what it would have looked like if I'd have painted it first, but it would have sped up that process. Now, although that isn't technically a mistake, it is something that I would then change if I was to paint something similar in the future. The reason why I didn't think at the time to paint the plant first is because I was so excited to get started to work on the frog with all of those lovely colours, I just got too engrossed in that initial process. But next time, knowing the information that I've learned from this, I would then do it slightly differently, paint this area first and then work on the subject. But again, there are many different ways to get to the same end. It really doesn't matter as long as we're happy with the finished painting. You do want to take extra care though around areas like the feet, because I don't want too much of this colour to be transferred over into the frog. But you'll see that I do drag some of the purples and magenta colours up into the lower part of the throat and the feet, and that helps to bring both areas together, because I changed the colour of this plant because I wanted to bring in some purples and magentas to my painting. Now, I felt like at this stage it was a really nice painting, I was happy with it, but it just needed something else. So I decided to add a few fireflies, and I was then really happy. I felt that it added that extra little element to give it a bit more balance. So I really do hope that this tutorial has been useful. If it was, I would really appreciate it if you could give it a like and a thumbs up. It makes a huge difference to my channel. I'd be really grateful. If you are interested in painting along to the real-time version of this on Patreon, then I'll link all of that in the description below. Here's a photo of my finished painting, and if you do have any art-related questions, anything I've covered in this tutorial, then feel free to pop them in the comments below, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. I also upload a couple of videos here to YouTube every week, so if you'd like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'm going to be uploading another video next week.